It had been 5 years since my divorce, and now, at 43 years old, I had spent all those years alone at night. One Tuesday, which I will always remember, I lay in bed, feeling utterly exhausted. The silence in the house was familiar, but this time it was interrupted by a soft, hesitant knock at the door. I woke up and sensed that something was off. "Adrian?" I called, and I heard my son's soft voice reply, "Mom." He opened the door and came in, looking shy in his pajamas, but these were no longer child's pajamas. They belonged to my 22-year-old son. As I glanced at his worried expression, my protective instincts kicked in, but I also felt uneasy. "I can't sleep," he admitted, looking down. I invited him to come lay down with me, patting the space beside me. After a brief moment of hesitation, he slid under the blanket. The bed creaked slightly as we settled down, now lying just inches apart. I could feel his body warmth, and I tried not to look at him, but it was hard not to notice how much he had changed. He was no longer a child. He had become a young man with a more defined face and broader shoulders. This realization made me feel embarrassed and confused. "Mom," he said quietly, turning towards me, sometimes I feel so alone in this house." His voice was fragile, and it made it hard for me to reply. Instead, I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. Without a moment's hesitation, he wrapped his arms around me tightly. The strength of his hug surprised me. I could feel his heartbeat and warm breath against my neck. To my surprise, I found myself hugging him back, which stirred a strange flutter in my chest. He moved even closer, his breath brushing against my skin, as he added, "Sometimes it's just too much." I whispered, "I'm here. I'm always here." But inside, I felt a rush of anxiety. My heart was racing, and I couldn't understand why this moment felt so intense. There was a certain innocence to Adrian's gesture, yet his hug was stronger and more intimate than I had anticipated. "Thank you, Mom," he murmured, his eyes closed. Soon, he fell asleep beside me. Meanwhile, I lay there, wide awake, wondering what had just transpired between us. The closeness of his hug felt too intimate, and I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling as the night wore on. As the first light of day peeked through the window, I noticed Adrian still sound asleep beside me. The glow of the sun gently illuminated his face, and I found myself watching him for a while. He looked so pure and peaceful, but inside, my feelings were all mixed up. I leaned back against the pillow and took a deep breath, knowing I needed some time to figure out what had happened the previous night. One thing was clear: this was not just an ordinary morning. As the sunlight gradually filled the room, I began to awaken. I realized I was still burdened by the emotions that had swirled inside me throughout the night. Adrian remained fast asleep, so I quietly slipped out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. I craved some time alone and wanted to prepare breakfast without waking him. Normally, Adrian wasn't an early riser, but today I felt the urge to do something to ease the restlessness brewing within me. I started gathering ingredients to whip up some pancakes. Just a few minutes later, I heard him stirring. When I glanced back, I saw him peeking from the doorway, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning," he said, but there was something off in his voice. He sounded both weary and cautious. "Good morning, honey," I replied, attempting to maintain a carefree vibe as I flipped the pancakes. I could feel Adrian's gaze on me, and there was something different about the way he was looking. His usual indifference had shifted. It felt like he was intently observing everything I did. I stirred the batter slowly, the warmth of the kitchen surrounding me, yet the unease inside me continued to grow. Once again, I noticed Adrian's eyes were fixed on me, but this time they held an unusual intensity. It was as if he was searching for something in my expression, tracing the outline of my form with his gaze. For a moment, I tried to ignore his stare, but I could tell that he sensed my discomfort. My heart started to race, but I made an effort to keep my composure and act as if everything was fine. Adrian's usual cheerful and relaxed demeanor had shifted. There was an invisible barrier between us, as if he was looking for the right moment to step closer and share what was on his mind. His eyes sparkled in the morning light, suggesting he wanted to communicate something, but I couldn't quite grasp what it was. Once the pancakes were ready, I placed them on a plate and handed them to him. "Enjoy," I said, my voice lacking its usual brightness. As he took the plate, his hands briefly tightened around it, and our eyes met for a heartbeat. In that moment, it felt like he was trying to connect with something deeper within me. I caught a glimpse of my own nervousness in my eyes, but Adrian remained silent. He simply took a seat at the table, and throughout breakfast, he didn't once meet my gaze. Each time I moved, his eyes would flick down from the ceiling back to me with a strange intensity, as if he was acutely aware of everything I did. This was a new experience for us. I could feel the conflict inside me growing. A voice within whispered that I needed to understand this situation right away, but I still didn't quite grasp what was happening. The way Adrian glanced at me and acted only deepened my confusion. And in the kitchen, with the comforting aroma of pancakes filling the air, that unusual tension hung between us. Something was waking inside me, but I pushed it away. I knew Adrian was watching me, but all I wanted was to focus on being a good mother. This morning was meant to be simple, just about breakfast. Yet, the warmth and anxiety I felt intensified as the sunlight streamed in, making everything feel different. As night fell, sleep began to weigh heavily on my eyelids, but I could sense a change in the atmosphere. I felt it deep down, although I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. As the night wore on, a sense of loneliness settled in my room, but something about the situation felt altered this time around. Adrian's behavior toward me seemed to be changing gradually. As I started to drift off to sleep, I found myself waking and closing my eyes repeatedly throughout the night. I sensed that something was coming, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. Suddenly, I heard a noise, which made me open my eyes in the dark room. I noticed a shadow moving slowly. A wave of fear washed over me, causing everything to blur for a brief moment. Then I realized that the shadow was Adrian, who had quietly entered the room through the slightly ajar door. My heart raced as I fully awakened. Why was my son in my room at this hour, especially when he knew I should be asleep? In the darkness, I could see Adrian's eyes shining with an intensity that reminded me of the previous night. I tried to focus on him, but my mind was clouded with confusion. His presence here was strange, yet it felt familiar, like an echo from earlier. The way he moved closer to me held a different kind of meaning. As he took another step forward, the moonlight illuminated his face a little more clearly, revealing a determination I had never seen before. Deep inside, something screamed for me to stop, but in that moment, Adrian leaned in and pressed his lips against mine. It all happened so fast. Time seemed to freeze. In that instant, it felt like the world was spinning around me, yet I was completely still, with my son just a breath away from me. As he kissed me, a whirlwind of emotion surged within me. This was not something a mother expected from her child. My heart started racing wildly. I quickly recoiled and pushed him back, breathless. "Stop! No!" I managed to say, but my words felt as if they faded into the silence like a whisper. Adrian stepped back, disappointment lingering in his eyes, yet he stood tall in the room. "Adrian, this isn't right. Don't do this," I said, my voice trembling. My head was spinning, and I was drenched in sweat, struggling to control the mix of feelings flooding over me. My son approaching me like this was both frightening and complicated. Though I couldn't deny the intensity of his focus, deep down, I felt that I had to maintain my role as a mother. The depth in Adrian's gaze was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, and it shook me to my core. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst, but I knew I needed to gather my strength and regain control of the situation. Adrian stepped back and fell silent, leaving a thick silence that hung in the dark. Then he moved closer to me and kissed me again, his hand sliding down from my neck to my waist and then to my hips. No matter how much I told myself to stop, I couldn't help but let things happen that night. When I woke up the next morning, confusion filled my mind. Adrian wasn't there, and I found myself alone in the room. I took a deep breath to steady my thoughts, then quietly left the house without saying a word. I could feel the weariness in my eyes and an emptiness in my chest. Each step felt heavy, as if I were wandering aimlessly. Inside, I was battling with my emotions, trying to figure out what had really happened. The feelings I had were confusing, and with each passing moment, they seemed to become more complicated. That night felt surreal, as if it might have been a dream. My eyes hurt, and my heart raced, but still, I walked out without a word to anyone. As I tried to hide what had occurred between Adrian and me, I battled with my understanding of it all. I chose to push aside my feelings, hoping to erase the memory, but deep down, I could feel something breaking within me. I kept asking myself why I felt so confused. It was as if I was lost in a storm of thoughts. My son had grown up, and I was struggling with whether I still saw him as the child he once was. Was I just fooling myself? What should I do? These questions swirled endlessly in my mind, and yet no answers came.